Final Stop Brasil, Chapter 30, Ibiza, Discrimination and Racism in School. The beginning of the trip was already a thrilling experience for Michael. The pilot invited him into the cockpit and explained him the fittings. This was to take the fear of his first flight. It might as well have been suitable for me, because this was my first flight since many years of absence, because after Ghana I had vowed never to fly again. When the plane started, Michael forgot his fear, watched out the window as we were getting faster on the runway, until we finally took off. We had our food served, and afterwards Michael occupied himself with his Game Boy, while I was reading. After 3.5 hours we reached our destination, and after we took our luggage from the belt, a lady awaited us from the travel agency, with a sign of the hotel name. With a comfortable bus we rode to the pretty and comfortable hotel, located in a small town called Santa Eulalia, 10 minutes away from the beach. The hotel room was cozy and equipped with everything. The balcony was facing the sea, and we enjoyed a wonderful view. In order to lose no time, our first way was to the beach. The beautiful white fine sand and blue sea, with a pleasant temperature, invited immediately for swimming. Since I had booked half-board, breakfast and dinner were included in the price. We returned in time and hungry to the hotel to get changed. Offered were hot and cold buffets. Michael thought it very exciting to go with his plate again and again, to take more of the tasty food, and especially to be allowed to eat as much ice cream as he wanted. The first evening we closed with a walk through the village, admiring the pretty white cottages. For hours we walked along the beach promenade until we reached the town center, where we found bars, restaurants, and street artists performing their shows. Back in the hotel, Michael slept the very moment he lay in bed. At 6 a.m. in the morning, I was awake and full of action, ready to go. I resolved to discover the island of Ibiza, and not just to laze 14 days on the beach. When I stepped out onto the balcony and looked at the sea, I thought, this is it, to be living in a paradise like this. But then I had doubts to live on an island, surrounded by sea. For a nice holiday it was okay, but to live here? Then my gaze fell down on the pool and the deck chairs surrounding it, and I asked myself, are they crazy here? Which normal person would put up his bath towel at this time of the morning, at 6 o'clock, on the deck chairs? Later I learned that English citizens were even crazier than the Germans concerning their holidays, using their bath towels already at 5 o'clock in the morning, reserving the deck chairs to spend all day, or rather to spend the entire holidays, with copious amounts of beer, having their kids looked after by the supervisory staff and entertainers, to drink in the evening more beer, filled their bellies with food, to ultimately fly back to their kingdom red as lobsters from the sun to reside. Oh, which wonderful vacation, without ever having been on the beach or somewhere else, and dare getting in their way in relation to the deck chairs, because they wouldn't find this amusing at all. I wondered, seriously, why they didn't simply remain at home on that sun lounger in the garden. It would be cheaper after all. After I showered and dressed, I woke Michael, or at least tried it. Mama, we're on vacation, let me sleep. I told him I was having breakfast already, and if he wanted, he could follow me. As I passed the front desk, I discovered the program for day trips and booked just about everything. On the same day, we took an island sightseeing tour with an air-conditioned coach passing the lowlands of the island, and we got to know Ibiza town, where I first tried paella. Michael was less enthusiastic about all the animals on the pizza and limited himself to fries. In the evening, back at the hotel, Michael participated in the dance for the children. The entertainers practiced with the little ones to the music of the summer hit Barbie Girl. We passed around the island with a glass-bottom catamaran and could see then the entire underwater world and many exotic fish. The boat stopped in a bay surrounded by beautiful scenery. Through the crystal clear water we could see down to the emerald green ground. We also took the opportunity to swim and sunbathe. With another ship, we headed to the smaller neighboring island of Formentera, where we visited after a nice lunch the city, a lovely town center, and the remarkable church. We strolled about the market and I bought postcards for my collection. Finally, we visited a pottery where beautiful things were made from terracotta. Happy about this wonderful day, we returned in the evening to Ibiza. Also, we made a trip to the mountainous countryside of Ibiza with the haciendas, orange trees and olive trees. And we discovered a beautiful view from the highest point above the sea. Offered was also a visit to a limestone cave, but I left Michael attended by himself. Due to wrong footwear, I preferred to wait in the terrace cafe where I enjoyed the beautiful scenery instead of breaking my legs. Unforgettable for us was the Jeep Safari, where I took over the steering wheel of the Jeep. As the only woman in the caravan of about 12 Jeeps, which rode up the steep double bends through the mountains. I was actually glad I was steering and having the focus on the shifting and steering. This way, at least, I didn't see which steep abysses I rode past. Next to Michael, another woman with her daughter had been assigned to our Jeep. Michael was very proud of his mum. I could feel it. Through the dust that settled on us by the open Jeep, mixed with the sweat running over our faces, we looked like pigs. When we finally made it to reach the highest point of Ibiza, we found a rustic mountain lodge where we were served a delicious lunch, consisting of Ibiza boar and good wine. The wine was served, however, Ibiza usual, in a decanter with a long slender neck, similar to those of a watering can. This neck was kept close above the faces and be poured unerringly so it ended up in the mouth. Well, not everybody scored right, and there were bigger drops running alongside the mouth or all over the face, which caused general amusement when one of the Jeep group poured and the other tried to drink. Strengthened after lunch, we went back down the double bends. When we reached the level, I was relieved and accelerated on the straight road. Finally, we stopped the jeeps in a bay, which I was not prepared for, thus didn't take bathing suits. I did feel, however, so dusty and dirty, I jumped into the water with all my clothes on. Michael followed my example, of what the rest of the group thought very funny. By the hot sun, our clothes dried pretty fast on our bodies. Exceptionally, we placed between our excursions a pure bathing day on the beach in the vicinity of the hotel, where I discovered a few English from the hotel did actually stay at the beach. They then asked me where we were constantly. We had drawn attention for our absence. "We want to know the island," I explained. The nightlife I also shared with Michael when we initially watched the flamenco show together. But really exciting it became for us in Ibiza town, the absolute party town. With a bus we rode to the center, where one disco and bar were lined to the other. Michael watched astonished, and his jaws dropped as we witnessed a travesty or drag queen parade. He first saw men in women's clothes, brightly painted with green, orange, and flaming red wigs, and shoes with such high heels that you should have been licensed as arms. House music was played from all over, and the streets were full of people. On top of the mountain we could see the lit up and very pretty castle. "Let us go up there," I cried enthusiastically. We marched initially in the flow of many people, but it was getting lonelier around us. We passed a few small yards and houses, and the only people we saw were some men looking like gypsies, who hung around at the street corners. We reached the castle, but now, viewing from nearby, it no longer looked so interesting, and when all the lights were switched off, it was not the same anymore. Now this place was rather eerie. We walked along the castle for a while, and stood finally in front of a cemetery. I imagined this somehow different. Michael clung to me, scared, and said softly, "Mum, let's leave here. Nothing better than that." So we made our way back, which was now pitch dark, until we heard the angry barking of a dog, seeming to come closer. Perplexed, I looked around. This was exactly what I needed now, to be attacked by an angry dog. I took Michael even more firmly by the hand, and we walked back up the hill until I found an alley, as I thought, leading down. But we landed in a maze of alleys. Sure, we arrived back in the city, but this only after long hours at early dawn, when we took a taxi back to a hotel. Michael's special joy was when I rented for 2 days a Fiat convertible, and we hurtled over the island to see places we hadn't seen yet, and beaches looking like painted. We stopped at each place, jumped into the water, and sunbathed. These were fantastic days, which went by much too fast. How much I would miss to take my daily café con leche at the beach bars, or to have a glass of Havana almond liquor, and have a chat with a nice shop assistant in the Mercado opposite the hotel. Michael was also wistfully lost in his thoughts at the airport when we waited for our flight back to Hamburg. In the last few days he had even found an English girlfriend, and also had discovered his passion for table football. Also, the table was so high he could hardly look across it, and therefore one of the waiters had brought an empty beer crate, turned it upside down, and stood Michael on top of it so he could play. This he did, and made all his bigger opponents run. At the end, nobody wanted to play no more with him. He was just too good. The Spanish guitars sounded still during the flight back in my ears. When we landed, it was back again, this big black curtain closing on me again. Oh, how much I hated having to return here. From conversations of other tourists, I heard phrases like, "Oh, it is nice to be back at home," or similar. For me, it certainly wasn't. Instead, it brought immediately this deep sadness, and I could have cried. A lot of time for sadness, however, I didn't have, because one event chased the other. Initially, I had to make preparations for Michael's birthday, then arrange for his first day of school, a cornet and sweets and other small gifts to fill it with. A few days before Michael's birthday, on the first day of school, I received a phone call from Dubai. I was flabbergasted when my Arab correspondent told me over the phone he had to do business in Germany and now was using this opportunity to finally meet me personally. Super. Couldn't he have chosen a better time? I wanted to cancel but didn't because I still dreamt of a life far away from Germany, in Dubai. So I went to pick up the Arab from Hamburg airport 2 days before Michael's birthday. Sabina and Tom, who were very curious about the Arab, came by the same evening to admire him and were quite surprised when they saw how many gifts he had brought for us. He corresponded exactly to the picture he sent me earlier. He was well educated, with very good manners, very polite, but for me he was just boring, and I wondered now how I would survive one long week with him. We spoke English, and I did the translation for Sabina and Tom. When he took something from his wallet to show us, Sabina got suddenly a strange gleam in her eyes and whispered to me in German, "Have you seen the gold Visa card?" I looked fixedly at Sabina and asked, "Do you want him? You can have if you like, complete with his gold Visa card," and earned the dirty look of Tom. Michael accepted our Arab visit without problems, but however kept himself distant. This visit, though, should still be far from everything, because the next day my parents called me to let me know they would arrive the day after. My father had insisted to witness Michael's first day of school, and since it was Michael's birthday one day before, it fitted very well for them. You want to spend the night here?" I stammered in disbelief. Of course they would. My parents never spent money for a hotel. Sabina and Tom suggested letting the Arabs spend the night with them in order to save me from the absolute chaos. "Remember, don't give him any pork meat," I warned Tom. Michael's first birthday guests were Grandma and Grandpa, to whom Michael complained about Mama, who had already given him for his birthday the much too small cornet. He was seriously worried about it, how he would stand in the school with this little cornet. "The others have all large ones. I know that," he mumbled at me. Of course I didn't tell him I had a big cornet for him hidden away, and this little one was just a joke for his birthday. Michael, though, didn't find it funny because I made him believe this was his cornet for the next day. Proudly, my toothless son presented my parents the milk keys that had already fallen out, and I collected them in the little joy box Marco had given me. My parents were quite astonished when the large and small guests arrived, about the diversity of nationalities. Mark from Nigeria, Rosa and Daryl from Costa Rica, Kadri and Halil, my neighbor and friend with their son, from Turkey, and our Arab from Dubai, in addition to some Germans. I extended my dining table and thus created a lot of space for the children, while the adults were seated in the living area, on couch and chairs. But during the evening all was mixed. There was plenty of drinking, and it was getting late. No one thought more about the next day, Michael's and many of his friends' first day of school. And he indeed had difficulties to survive the enrollment ceremony, which was started by the higher classes performing a theatre play. Even when the photos were taken of him with a huge school cornet, his eyes almost closed. He was absolutely finished when during the end he was the first time together with his classmates in the classroom and assigned to the seats. Here he was dropping his head on the table and fell asleep. This brought him pretty much discredit by his teacher on the first day. Mrs. Wetzel was an older, conservative lady with whom I had already clashed on the first parents' reunion before the enrollment, when the parents were asked about the father's occupation. It was simply assumed the mothers were housewives, which was mostly the case in this noble part of Hamburg-Bahrenfeld. When it was my turn, I told quite candidly, "We haven't got a father, and what I do for a living, I think that's nobody's business. Finally, my son is starting school, not me." Thus, I saw myself confronted with many horrified faces. Some looked away in embarrassment. Only one laughed, Jens, Daryl's stepfather. Of course, I had nothing to hide. On the contrary. But I didn't see the point that the children were judged on the education or occupancy of their fathers, in my case, the mother. Mrs. Wetzel incited it wasn't meant like that. But I continued to provoke. No? How then? A son of a prosecutor and another one of a prostitute. Which one of the two are with the better chances in your opinion? The chaos was perfect. All talked mixed together. But with these Philistines, which rethought to which high school they would send their children, even before they started with this school, I was overcome with a feeling this school was not necessarily the right one for Michael, and I was correct. The school was located directly next to the daycare, and this was why I registered Michael here and not in the primary school of our district. While now the children sat, or in Michael's case slept, on the first day of school in the classroom, parents and grandparents waited in the break room with coffee and cake. Finally, Michael and Daryl came back from the class with a new schoolmate, followed by a Mrs. Wetzel who eyed me with a reproachful glance. "Can it be that your son is not getting enough sleep?" Michael piped in between, "I fell asleep in the class." I explained her why and promptly went into the offensive. It will not happen again, but I'm sure Michael didn't really miss too much on his first day, did he? On the way home, my mother criticized. "You can't talk to the teacher like this." I gave back, "No? How? Should I take all the shit like the way you've done it in the early days?" After having coffee at home, my parents started. They were still planning to go to the Baltic Sea. My father, who previously had looked with great interest at all my notes and resumes, said, with a little pride in his voice, "You made your way." I knew what he meant, and that he understood. I was different from my sisters, lived a completely different life, but I had this life under control. Michael and I went on our way to pick up the Arab. When we arrived, they all sat at the table already. Tom invited, "Come, you two, can eat with us. There are enough stuffed cabbage rolls for all." The Arab ate with big appetite. I asked suspiciously, "Tom, the grounded meat is not..." Tom grinned. Tom grinned and replied, "Well, he won't notice the difference anyway. You see, he likes it." I showed the Arab a little of Hamburg, and we took the elevator up to the TV tower where something existed he probably didn't see in Dubai yet: bungee jumping. Fascinated, he watched as the man, secured with a rope, jumped from the television tower. I could hardly get him away from there. Secretly, I sighed when the week was finally over. My dream of Dubai dispatched in pleasure. I'd rather stayed in Hamburg as with such a bore in Dubai. As from now on I was regularly, once a week, called to a conversation in the school, and always heard the same thing: Michael and Daryl are disturbing the lessons. They are loud and rude. Michael is often very aggressive and beats his classmates. Regularly I defended my son. "The other pupils are all good and never do anything. I don't think he hits someone for no reason, though I can't prove he hits at all, but I'm sure he was provoked." Michael confirmed me just this, even though I warned him again and again to beat no one. The other pupils called Michael and Daryl discriminating names, and still worse. Mrs. Wetzel didn't seem to listen to this agitation. I spoke with the teachers of the daycare, and these were completely incomprehensible because they knew Michael a long time by now, and for them he was a very sociable child, always lovable, except for the one incident with Darrell. They couldn't imagine Michael being aggressive. In further talks with Michael, I heard that Mrs. Wetzel ignored him when he pointed out he wanted to speak. She turned instead to other pupils. She only took notice of his presence when he made himself noticed in an unpleasant manner. He was particularly very sad when the children began to close friendships and invited each other to their homes, simply to play together or for birthdays. Darrell and he were always left out of anything. This I found out when one evening I found Michael in bed crying. Initially, he didn't want to talk, but when I drilled, it broke out of him. Nobody in the class likes me. Seriously, I thought about changing school, but he was simply too young to go alone on the bus to the daycare after school, or even to be alone. I was perplexed. More and more often, Michael asked me, "Why can't I be white like you?" This hurt me more than anything else that Michael suffered by his skin color. In my spirit, I heard once again Tony's words. How right he was. This, what now happened, he had known before and wanted to spare his children this. But I had to stay strong, and again I explained to Michael, exactly how you are, this is how I wanted you, and I'm very proud of you. You're much prettier than these ugly Germans. But I wasn't only worried about Michael. Robert had turned to the youth welfare and wanted to enforce his rights through the court. So I additionally received constantly visits of a lady of the youth welfare. Kathy had been beaten by Mark, so heavy that she was hospitalized. He had demolished the house completely. All the CDs the two owned were trampled and mixed with scraps of torn photos, scattered on the carpet. We reported him to the police, and I had the door lock replaced in the flat, took care of Kathy and comforted her. 2 days later, Kathy's face still appeared awful. When I came to look after things, I met Mark in the apartment. Embarrassed and sheepishly, Kathy explained his presence. Everyone deserves a second chance yet, right? Without a word, I left the apartment. I couldn't help Kathy. Away, far away, from all this crap, I wanted to leave everything behind me and start with Michael somewhere completely new. In the autumn, Michael and I took a flight to London. Victor picked us up from Heathrow Airport. The joy of reunion was huge. For Michael and me, I booked a hotel room at Russell Square in order to be most possible centrally located. Victor, who was now studying mathematics at the university and jobbed beside the studies, spent as much time with us as it was possible for him. But we made our own trips too. With the London Underground, where the guards always gave helpful information in a friendly manner and indicated the ways, it was no problem. I showed Michael the Piccadilly Circus, Chinatown, Notting Hill. We visited the world-famous Waxworks Museum, Madame Tussauds, which impressed Michael very much, with all the international artists, politicians and the royal family. Together with Victor, we visited Buckingham Palace, watched the changing of the guards, walked through Hyde Park to admire the London Towers, to the huge Thames River and the Thames Bridge, Big Ben, Houses of Parliament. It was pretty much the complete tourist program. Michael was literally glued to Victor, and nobody was giving us stupid looks here. Apparently, we were like a normal family, like many others. When Victor and I sat alone in a pub one evening, I discussed with him the possibility to live here with Michael. Victor commented it wouldn't be easy, but work I should certainly find here. He warned me, though, life was very, very expensive in England. This I had already noticed. The flight, hotel, meals and trips cost me 3,000 marks for 5 days, as much as 10 days in Ibiza. But if Michael could grow up carefree without racism, nothing would be too expensive. Victor dissuaded me. London is not a city for children, but if you decide of coming here, I'll help you, of course. Michael liked the idea very much, because he had set his heart on Victor, and this city was pure adventure for him. About everyday life, he knew as little as I did. After our return, I went initially into the next round with Mrs. Wetzel, by accusing her that in her class were children who would be poisoned by their parents with racist agitation, and it was her task to address this as a teacher. I sat down a few times during the lesson to find out exactly what was going on, but of course those days were calm. One of these days Mrs. Wetzel told the children of Africa. Well, at least it was a start. Another day she asked Michael to come forward and report the others about his trip to London. Even better. This way the children will learn to respect him, because as far as traveling is concerned, he is well ahead of the others. Mrs. Wetzel remarked in a peaceable way. Nevertheless, I had my entire notes and resumes translated into English and sent copies with cover letters to employees in and around London. It didn't take long, and I got invitations for interviews. I explained Michael why I would travel to England alone this time. For him was the prospect of being soon forever close to Victor was reason enough to accept it and stay the next 2 weeks while I would be finding work and housing with Rosa and Darrell. Victor organized me a stay in the West End with an older couple and picked me up from the airport, this time together with his younger brother JJ, whom I had known only from photographs so far. The couple with whom I stayed was very nice, and they didn't have the slightest problem when I arrived with my 2 African companions. On the contrary, the woman said, "Your boyfriend is very nice and likable." Boyfriend? We had become friends, good friends. More existed no longer between us. Victor had not yet shown me how and where he lived, but he visited me every day, and we went out for dinner or in a pub. What surprised me, however, was he reacted jealous if I talked with other men in the pub. Then it almost hit me off the chair when he suddenly started he should first introduce me to his parents before we got married. "Pardon me," Victor grinned. "Sorry, I really can't follow you," I said to him. Between us was not the slightest intimacy anymore, except Victor now and then put his arm around me. And now he spoke of getting married. "Victor likes you very much, you know. I have such a feeling you will be one day my sister-in-law," JJ commented mysteriously when I told him his brother didn't know what he really wanted. I already had a job as good as in my pocket, with double the salary as in Germany, but I didn't find an apartment, because they cost 3 times as much as in Germany. The couple where I lived told me during a conversation I should register Michael only in a private school, because the public schools enjoyed a very bad reputation. Daycare I could forget about. There were only private nannies and babysitters, if one could afford it, because I fell out here, unfortunately. There were a lot of neighborhoods in London one should be better off avoiding, in the ghettos. It was very dangerous. I had previously not known this, and the cost of living were immense. Sadly, I had to admit I would perish here with Michael alone. That I couldn't rely on Victor, he proved to me on the last night before my trip home. He settled once again not showing up, even though we had a date. He had promised me to show me London's nightlife. Angry and sad, at the same time I went alone to Piccadilly Circus. In the vicinity were a number of discos and clubs. In one black music club, I met Tony Miller, a tall, handsome black man with impeccable, cultivated English. We flirted, he invited me for a drink, we danced together, and I gave him my phone number from Hamburg before I left. Victor didn't come to take me to the airport. Instead, JJ came to help me with my luggage. Sometimes even I don't understand Victor, he tried to comfort me. I smiled at JJ. This boy I like very much, and also he resembled his brother a lot. I found him much more handsome than Victor. JJ was very open and warm, and his laugh was very refreshing. And you? Do you always know what you want? I asked. He gave me the answer, in no case an Englishwoman, that's for sure. If you get to know a girl here, she'll be asking you first what you earn before she asks you for the name. He burst out indignantly, and I had to laugh about it, even if I didn't feel like laughing. He waited with me until my flight was called up. We keep in touch, okay, sister-in-law? Parting, we hugged each other like real brother and sister. Tony Miller soon called me every night, and we talked for hours on the phone. He sent me his photo, and some of my friends commented, "He looks great. How do you do it always to pick up those handsome guys?" Before the end of the year, I jetted to London for the third time. With Tony, I spent a romantic, passionate weekend in his apartment in a house he shared with several young people. He invited me to dinner at a chic restaurant, and we strolled hand in hand through the city. Busy buying something, he suddenly jerked his hand from mine, and I looked after him as he left the shop. Through a shopping window, I watched as he apparently argued with a woman on the other side of the street. "Who was it?" I asked him in an easy manner. Tony just replied briefly, "Unimportant." Tony was intelligent, worked as a security guard for a large English department store, had his own apartment, paid with his credit card. There was no reason for me to be suspicious. He was a very good lover. And during the entire Saturday night we spent at his home. We didn't sleep 1 minute. We made love over and over again, and Tony gave me everything I had missed for so long. In between we drank wine, ate Chinese takeaway, and then made love again. I already had to leave on Sunday, but we both knew this was only the first weekend of many meant to be followed. Neither of us had an idea what still would be happening this very day, and it felt like a bad movie. We were still sleeping around 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, because my flight was at 5 p.m., as someone was knocking like crazy, initially on the door, and then on Tony's window. Reluctantly he stood up, wrapped a towel around his beautiful body, opened the door, and saw himself confronted with 2 police officers. Brusque, they asked him to dress something while immediately entering the apartment. Tony was totally surprised, and completely without conscious of guilt, he asked what they were holding against him. I was also undressed, totally confused and scared. I gathered my clothes and tried to dress somehow under the protection of the blanket. The policeman didn't leave Tony for a minute unobserved, therefore made no move accordingly to leave the room. "Tony, what does it mean?" I cried excitedly. He didn't know it, and the police, who even handcuffed him now, after he had dressed, commented he would find out soon enough at the police station. In my shock, I jumped up now, embraced and kissed Tony before they took him away. "I won't let you down, Tony," I whispered to him, and addressed to the police. "Which police station? In what area are you taking him?" The next moment I was alone in this strange house in the middle of London, and this arresting passed over and over again before my eyes. It couldn't be true. Why did these things happen to me? Why I was not allowed to be happy for once? Without knowing what would happen to Tony and whether I would ever see him again, I packed up my things. It was no use. I had to go back to Hamburg and back to work. To remain any longer would not have helped him. Weeping, I took a bus to the airport. Back at home, I found out first of all through the international information the telephone number of the police station and called the same evening, even though it was late. I was lucky because a friendly policeman, very willing to give information, answered the call and explained to me in detail why Tony was arrested. Namely, Tony was not English but came from Liberia and should now be deported. Why this sudden decision he could not or didn't want to explain to me. But he even allowed me to speak a few minutes with Tony. Yes, he was fine and was treated well. He promised me to explain the backgrounds later. Then he gave me the number of his friend and asked me to call him for taking care of Tony's stuff. I lived as in a state of shock. How could people be treated like this, which did nothing more than to live illegally in a country? They were treated like heavy criminals. Almost every day I called in England, but not always I managed to speak to Tony. Sometimes I was allowed, then again not. It was said then he was in an interrogation. I was very worried. When I talked to Roland about it, he introduced me a few days later to John, a Ghanaian who earned his money as a hairdresser in an afro shop. John seemed to know about these problems of deportation and explained to me that Tony would probably be deported. From London initially, they would take him to Schiphol in the Netherlands. John's uncle, he explained, was powerful enough to organize other documents for Tony and to bribe the police to get Tony out of the transit. John promised me to find out by his uncle when and where they would bring Tony. So I actually only kept trace through John that Tony had been transferred to a deportation prison at Gatwick Airport. Only with many phone calls, I finally found the phone number of this place. When I called there and asked to be allowed to talk to Tony, the security guard asked who I was. To simplify things, I lied. "I'm his fiancé. We want to get married." "You are his fiancé?" the guard asked, very attentive, and I confirmed this again. He took down my name and asked me to call back the next day. On this day, I was not allowed to talk to Tony. The next day, they actually did call Tony on the phone. He, though, wasn't pleased at all I had found him. Instead, he yelled at me how I could stay to be his fiancé. I would only get him in even bigger trouble, and anyway, I shouldn't call him anymore. I was confused, sad. My dream with Tony had burst. When John called me and asked for news, I only noticed bitterly, all right, they can deport him wherever they want to. The year ended very sad and lonely for me. Michael could feel it and often asked me, "Mom, why are you so sad?" "Because I feel lonely, Michael," I explained to him honestly. "But you've got me." How should I explain to my 6-year-old son that it was not always enough, even though I was very, very happy having him? I tried to forget Tony, but I couldn't. One night, finally, Tony's friend called me to clear up everything to me. Tony was married, but for him it was a fake marriage to stay in England. This explained why he lived alone in the apartment. I had gotten to know. His wife, however, saw this quite different and had spied after him. Finally, she had reported him to the police when she realized he would not return to her. Because of accusations of fake marriage, he had been denied the permit and therefore was now in detention. Tony's friend told me several times it had been Tony who wanted him to explain all this to me. Tony had been dismissed after his wife had declared and guaranteed they would live together again. After all, Tony had no choice if he was not to be sent back to the country Liberia, shaken by civil war. His wife now had complete control over him. Modern slavery. "And why, you should call me and explain all this to me?" I asked resignedly. "Because you mean a lot to Tony," was his reply. In fact, I saw Tony one last time when he called me himself and begged me to come to London. Initially I refused. What should it be good for? But he persuaded me, and I finally took the opportunity to see Victor and JJ again. Victor knew how much I suffered. I had told him about Tony and what had happened. This time I was picked up from the airport by Tony's friend, who dropped me off in a hotel and prepared me that Tony might not appear. Perhaps he didn't know it. Told me so much that his wife just left him alone out of the house only to go to work. Permanently she threatened him to report him back to the police. In the afternoon Victor and JJ came to see me. To distract me a bit, they proposed to join them to go to a discotheque. "No, I'm waiting for Tony," I refused. "Okay, we wait together until 11. If he doesn't come until then, we'll take you with us." Victor decided. 11 p.m. came, but Tony didn't appear. I went with Victor and JJ to the disco, but without any spirit, even though it was indeed good music and nice people there. I met some friends of Victor, but with my thoughts I was somewhere else. I didn't stay long and took a taxi back to the hotel. At the reception, the receptionist informed me a man had asked for me, waited a while, and then left again. He didn't leave a name or message. When I asked, I got the answer I knew. Yes, a colored man. In the hotel room, I threw myself on the bed and sobbed in despair. Why, I asked myself again and again, why couldn't I be happy? Not once. It was perhaps an hour later, I still cried for myself as the phone rang and the receptionist reported to me the same man was back again. I literally flew down the stairs to the reception and directly into Tony's arms, who covered my face with kisses and occasionally muttered, "I missed you so much, Rita." In my hotel room, he held me so tightly as if he would never let me go again, while he explained everything to me. His application for political asylum had been rejected because Liberia had been at the time of the Keys fire in the Civil War. Tony had been tortured. The scars on his legs I had already noticed the weekend we had together. If he would return to his country, he was threatened of death because he was an opponent of the war. Out of his desperation, he had married one of his former girlfriends, not for love. When he left her, she had spied after him. It was now clear to me. The day we were in central London, in this shop, and Tony had left suddenly to speak to this woman. It was his wife. Angry to see him with another woman, with me, she had reported him to the police because of fake marriage. She had also freed him again from deportation, but he was now firmly in her hand. "Why don't you look for any other documents? Thousands of Africans do so," I suggested. "Or come to me to Germany." Tony refused. "How can I live there in my present situation? Assume a false name and live with false documents. I'm not a criminal. No, this is not my thing. There will be a solution. In a few years, I will get a divorce. Do you sleep with her? I asked. Tony looked at me sadly. How can I sleep with someone for whom I have no feelings? We made passionate love until the morning, caring and clinging to each other with the desperate knowledge it would be the last time. First off, I buried my dream to leave Germany. Resigned, I told myself it was simply not meant to be, and I would eventually die old and lonely in this country. My friends held against me I was living in a dream world, since there were so many nice German men, with whom I certainly would not go through such problems as I experienced. With a glance at Tom, I waved off and said to Sabine, "No thanks, I'd rather stay alone." I kept hidden during the evenings in front of the TV, stuffing chocolate and chips into me. With Kathy, the ratio was fairly balanced at this time. I was alone and unhappy, which Kathy liked best. However, the stories she told me how she and Mark achieved all the luxury goods, my hair stood up on end. Mark forged credit cards and passports, driver license and identification cards, and Kathy, who owned by now her driver's license, drove with his documents to Holland, where she met with customers. Now and then she flew to England and provided fake papers out there. By fraud with catalogue orders, they ordered goods under a false name, and for the delivery date put exactly this false name at the front door, to remove it afterwards immediately. Thus, they never paid a penny for the goods. It shocked me that Kathy didn't possess awareness it was incorrect of what she was doing. "Oh, in an honest way you get nowhere," was her argument about it. Mark actually started, in addition to his criminal activities, his studies in Flensburg, where he also lived, now 5 days a week, and came home only at weekends. The living and travel expenses they financed through their criminal activities, or Kathy funded it. When the supermarket, where she worked as cashier, closed down, she was quite desperate. So I asked Roland, always hoping she would still be drawn to an honest path, to give Kathy a chance in the discotheque as a cashier. "But I warned Kathy, Roland is doing me a favor. Keep your hands off the money in the till." And she stuck to it, because she came to love this job, actually. If I visited Roland, I had to smile when I saw Catherine sitting at the till, as I had been once. I then looked around the club and saw only happy couples. So I hid in the office and returned quickly back home. Michael spent hours in his room and played with his PlayStation. It bored him to sit with me watching TV, even though he then suddenly appeared from nowhere, hugged me, gave me a kiss, and asked, "Do you still love me?" "Yeah, I love you very much, and I will love you forever," I answered him then. The situation in the school relaxed a little after a parents' evening was held, and Mrs. Wetzel drew attention, after my pressuring, of the other parents on Michael's troubles and hardships. Since then, Michael was even invited by the other children at home. I had the feeling Michael had fell in love for the first time with a girl from his class. The two sat side by side now in the school, which had a very positive effect on Michael, in performance and behavior. Unfortunately, this condition would not be lasting a long time. One evening, I wondered once again if I should go to my enormous bed, or rather, like always, sleep in the living room on the couch. Basically, I slept very well while the TV was on all night. If I woke up then and went to bed, bam, my fatigue was gone and I was lying awake for hours. However, if I slept on the couch where I curled up like a cat, also I suffered the next day under back pain, but was rested. This evening I decided this must change now. I would throw out all this furniture from old times and set me off again, just for me and my taste. If they're old and lonely, then at least comfortable and extravagant. So I put an ad in the newspaper, offering all the furniture in my apartment for sale, except my dining room, which was my pride and joy. Soon a man responded to me by phone. I could hear he was not a German. Better still, the man came from Ghana and brought his German wife to view the furniture. 2,000 marks for living room, bedroom and children's room furniture. With a price he already had agreed without negotiation, I asked whether he bought the furniture for them. By his answer I was quite amazed. The man was just about to build the furniture, buying in Germany and sales in Ghana. And where is the profit in this? I asked with interest, because for furniture in the value of 2,000 marks, plus container, export and import to Ghana, I seriously asked myself, who could rise as much Ghanaian cedis to pay the price this man would estimate to still draw a profit out of it? And who owned so much money would certainly prefer to buy new furniture instead of second-hand. Right now, my husband is still building it up. There is no profit. But I believe in him and invest. He can buy furniture until he has a shipping container filled up. I must have made a pretty stupid face to this comment, because she defended adamantly her motives. I love my husband. Yes, I understand, I answered, confused and thinking secretly, why not throw your money away directly? Makes less work. Anyway, I was glad to receive more money for the junk than expected. So I went to a furniture store and bought a bright orange designer sofa, L-shape, which could be changed to a huge double bed, with a spacey bed storage underneath, where the bedding could disappear in at daytime. A new table, a huge shelf display case in black, doors in grey-black with painted patterns, complete new furniture for Michael's room with a bigger wardrobe with elegant folding doors. In addition, I chose new wallpaper and carpeting. My furniture export specialist came to pick up my old junk. Initially, they both unscrewed and disassembled the furniture into parts, but after a short time, the Ghanaian sat himself down at the dining table while I watched the activities and talked, for my taste too much, while his wife heaved the furniture parts alone to the car trailer. You have to do it a bit faster, he urged his wife, whereupon my patience reached its limit. I couldn't watch this poor woman any more. How about giving her a hand? Your wife can't carry everything alone. Slowly he got up and dragged the heavy parts down with his wife. Initially it was peaceful and quiet. Then both came back, snuffling up the stairs, he grumbling and she dissolved in tears. The furniture don't fit all in the trailer, he cursed. I escorted both down to look at the mess myself. It was all jumbled without any organization. As a consummate professional in moving house, I now directed the spectacle to reorganize the complete operation. The pieces of glass and mirrors must be protected with blankets, and everything must be tied and secured with rope, I instructed. Rope came of both in one voice. Of course they hadn't thought of rope. Why didn't you think of rope? He shouted again at his wife. Why her? I asked myself, shaking my head in amazement, imagining what I would do with this man along with the furniture if I would be married with something like this. While he fought now with her to get rope, no matter how or where. The problem was it was Sunday and hardly a shop open where to buy rope. I suggested taking her to a gas station. Maybe we would be lucky. We were. Happy she held a rope in her hand, and we were on the way back. Oh, God in heaven sent me this man. I must do everything to keep him and make him happy, came relief from her mouth. I stared at her in disbelief and almost riveted into a lamppost. Still shaking my head, I asked my neighbor Kadriye for coffee after I got rid of the two along with the furniture. And taking coffee together, me and Kadriye laughed tears when I told her about the comedy. Tom and Sabine helped with the wallpapering and carpeting. Michael and I slept on air mattresses until the new furnitures were delivered. "What are you planning to do with your bedroom?" Tom asked. I answered mysteriously, "Wait, in time you will know it and see." Of course I had clear ideas. After Michael had his new furniture with a new wardrobe which filed for both of us, and I had set up my living and sleeping area, I put yet another ad in the paper. Female tenant wanted, preferably weekend driver, for large bright room with kitchen and bathroom. 250 marks per month. It was a veritable parade of visiting the room, and after about 30 young women, I was ready to give up. Either they didn't like something or I didn't like the women. Somehow we had to fit together though, if we lived under one roof. But then came Jana, and I knew at first sight she was the perfect tenant for us. She was satisfied with the room and planned to set it up to her taste. The price for the rent was okay for her, and for me it was okay that she traveled home at weekends to her parents in East Germany. This way, Michael and I were now sharing the apartment with Jana for 5 days a week, but on weekends we were for us alone. For me, this fulfilled two things. I didn't feel so much alone in this big apartment, and it improved on my way badly buttered budget. Actually, Jana and I got on together very fine. Often sat together in the evening watching TV, or sometimes the TV would stay off and we were sitting together with a tea just for a chat. I found myself forced to reminding her every month of the rent, but she paid, no doubt, latest after the third reminder. It wasn't that she possessed no money. She simply forgot it. I didn't take it amiss, and she didn't mind me irritating her with reminders. But in some ways we were totally different. She liked to listen to techno music and had a German boyfriend. Beside Rosa, with whom I went for dancing now and again in the Chocolate City, there was no other company for me, and I no longer liked to go out alone. I started feeling too old for this now. One day, while reading the newspaper, one ad caught my eye. "We are a group of young women, and young at heart, loving black music and everything black. Do you belong to us? Then call." Spontaneously, I called the number and met this group when a meeting in the apartment of Angelica, nicknamed Gelly, arranged so all of us would get to know each other better. I noticed right away that I found in Gelly and Renata soul sisters. They were like me, just as crazy as me and with the same wavelength. The others liked black music, but that was it. Gelly was with an African from Mali, and Renata had a boyfriend from Gambia. In this round, I was the eldest. Gelly was in her early 30s, Renata in her late 20s. But the two vogued. I wasn't appearing like my 37 years, and despite my preponderance, looked very pretty. Soon developed a strong and deep friendship between the three of us, and I phoned every evening with either one or the other. At weekends we often went out together. I got to know new bars and clubs where reggae and zouk African music was played. But we also frequented the Chocolate City. I flirted with some men, but I wouldn't let anyone come too close to me. Gelly asked me one day, "What are you scared about? You have built a wall around you that allows no one close to you." I wasn't really aware of it myself, but I really had no more interest, and certainly not in Africans. They meant nothing but trouble anyway. The kind of man I would be interested in isn't existing. Well, At least not in Germany, I answered gaily. After things were running quite smooth for a while, I was once again called for a conversation in the school. This time it was very serious, and the director even talked about dismissing Michael from the school. Michael had kicked the girl with whom he got along so well previously in the genitals. Before you dismiss my son from school, give him a chance to justify himself, or to tell what had happened before. He did what he did. I know my son, and no, he doesn't beat and kick about without a reason. There is no excuse for what he did, but I'm sure this girl must have provoked him extremely. I defended Michael. A new date was agreed. Michael told me he had changed places in the class and now sat next to another girl, which annoyed his former seat neighbor, or better girlfriend, so much she had insulted and provoked him by saying things like, "Go back to the jungle," or "If you wash yourself properly, then you might be lighter," and even worse things. A girl of 7 not really thought up herself. And I was right with my guess. For the next scheduled date, the girl appeared with her father, as Michael was in my company. The things this father brought out were just insulting, discriminating, and begat of stupidity. And this I also told this man in his face, whereupon he verbally attacked me. "Who are you? Illegitimate nigger child and all, as one can't indeed expect nothing else." Turning to the director, I said, "You know that I feel great advantage to do with this man the same as Michael did with his daughter, but I'm grown up and learned to control myself with such idiots. Michael, however, still has to learn to control himself." The man roared around uncontrolled. The director called him to order, but he was totally overwhelmed with the situation. I noticed the whole thing was more than uncomfortable for Michael. He repeatedly tried to stop me from speaking. "Mom, leave it." Ultimately, the director asked Michael to apologize for what he had done and yet give him one last chance to remain in school. "Michael will apologize, but only if the girl also apologizes," I demanded. The children finally shook hands, what the father of the girl didn't like at all. "There will be nothing done against this boy? Well, then I will report it." This was getting too stupid for me now. I told Michael, "Come, let's go," saw myself off politely from the director, and turned around again. "Go ahead, reporting charges against the small boy, and make yourself ridiculous. We do have a capable lawyer." We never heard anything again of this man. Nonetheless, I was worried about Michael, and talked to him about it several times, that he must ignore stupid talks and must not beat. Michael, to beat is stupid and something for primitive people who are lacking words and arguments. But violence is never a solution to problems. One day you could get yourself into great difficulties. I wondered if Michael might need something to reduce his excess energy. He loved to play football with the boys outside, and his friend Kevin was already in a football club. "Michael, don't you have desire to play with Kevin in the club?" Of course he had, and so I registered him, paid the contribution, and for the tricot bought him expensive football shoes, and Michael was happy. Regularly he went to the training and seemed actually to be more balanced. Then I received yet another call from the school. I should come immediately to pick up my son. What happened now again? Terrified, I went to the school, stormed through the building to the classroom, but didn't see Michael there. Mrs. Wetzel asked me to come outside with her. Before we left the class, I heard whispers and noticed sardonic grins on some faces. "Your son has head lice." She spoke this out as if Michael had the plague. Immediately after I noticed it, I sent him out into the playground. She explained, and I could feel my anger rise up in me. "And my son is, of course, the only one who has head lice, yes?" I asked cynically. So far, yes. I haven't exactly looked up the others yet, she admitted meekly. The other kids know why Michael was sent outside, I asked, and she answered, yes, of course, they noticed. It couldn't be avoided. Ideally, I could have slapped Mrs. Wetzel left and right in the face. Instead, I shouted at her, do you have the least idea what you are doing to Michael? When I turned around to walk towards the playground, she called after me, remember that Michael may return only with a doctor's certificate which confirms he has no more lice. It cut me into my heart when I saw Michael lonely and sad, sitting on a swing, humiliated in front of all the kids. I approached him, took him in my arms, and said softly, let's go home. First off, Michael said not a word. At home he asked, Mom, what are lice? I explained it to him, and also this was no reason to be ashamed. Head lice finally occurred not infrequently in schools. Even in my childhood, I remembered back, were warnings of head lice. Fortunately, I was always spared. Accordingly, I was now at a loss how to get rid of them again. Looking for advice, I called Rosa, and she knew what to do. Spontaneously, she caught a bus, and little later, she stood in front of us with some fluid. This she distributed generously in Michael's tight curls, put a plastic bag on his head, and explained to me that I need to wash all bed linen boiling hot. The plush animals in Michael's bed, she gave me instructions, I should wash and then put them in the freezer of the refrigerator. What? I asked, quite stupid. Boiling hot or freezing cold, that way the lice die off, Rosa explained to me. Do I have to put Michael's head also in the freezer? We now had both to laugh about my stupid question, even though I didn't feel like laughing at all. Why is it always Michael? I asked, becoming serious again. Rosa only shrugged her shoulders. Secretly, I thought, while I withdrew Michael's sheets, Daryl is completely black. Why no one is hacking on him? But basically, I knew the answer. Daryl was already so intimidated, the others just simply ignored him. He wasn't noticed. By nature, he was much quieter than Michael, and in the class, he said nothing, so he was ignored by Mrs. Wetzel too. Rosa had not once been at school, not even on his first day. She left the school problems to Jens, and Jens was an ass-kisser. With this, however, I didn't want to charge me. They were not my problems. Once the liquid had been long enough on Michael's scalp, and already burnt and caused him pain, we washed it off, and Rosa showed me now Michael's head bent upside down over the tub edge with a comb, the little black creatures, while Rosa combed them out of his hair on the white floor of the bathtub. She explained to me the lice lay eggs, which are barely visible, therefore very difficult to get out of the hair, and this procedure should be repeated several times until all lice were dead. How often? I asked cautiously. 4 or 5 times, she replied calmly. Soon after, she had left us alone to examine Daryl's head as well. It burns so much, and the combing hurts as well. I don't want to do this again, lamented Michael. Nor do I, was my answer, and asked him to dress the fresh t-shirt I threw at him. And come with me. Where are we going? Asked Michael, when we were already on the road. To an afro shop. What do we do there? Haircut, I replied resolutely. With Michael in tow, I entered the store where Africans cut other Africans their hair, braided them, or whatever. One of the barbers asked what to do. I gave the statement, cut it off entirely. First off, he cut with scissors and asked after a while, is this short enough? Undeterred, I shook my head. All off. Everything. Michael looked at me with horror through the mirror. Michael, it will grow very quickly again, I said with unwanted hardness, because I was still angry with Mrs. Wetzel. The hairdresser was now already with a razor on crop level and asked again, "Is this short enough?" While Michael nodded eagerly, I repeated, somewhat impatiently, "Everything. Bold." For a moment the hairdresser gave me the impression as if he would refuse, but then shrugged his shoulders and remarked laconically, "Well, you must know what you're doing." Michael's appearance actually needed a little getting used to. I strained to suppress a laugh. As the next destination, we went to see the pediatrician. "Would you be so kind to attest that my son has no head lice? The school requires it." The doctor looked at Michael and then asked, laughing, "Is this a joke? Where should be head lice on this head?" "Unfortunately, this is no joke. This morning he namely still had head lice, and for he may return to school I need the certificate." This was also done. "And now I'll buy you a chic head scarf." With the scarf I bought cool hip-hop clothes and expensive Puma sports shoes. It was an expensive purchase, but it was worthwhile to build up Michael's self-confidence again. With the equipment he looked like one of the American hip-hop stars. Lacked only the sunglasses, but this, so I decided, would have been too much. Michael no longer even bothered his bald head. On the contrary, he was glad he could escape this way the delousing process. Michael, stupid people need to be shown that they can be beaten with their own stupidity. This is a better solution than to fight, I explained to him in the evening, and also what I had in mind the next day. I accompanied Michael to school, but we deliberately delayed by a quarter of an hour. I wanted to make sure that all sat on their chairs. And they were all present as Michael, his head held high, and I entered. The face of Michael's teacher I would not forget my life when I handed her wordlessly the certificate. The kids reviewed, interested, Michael's new outfit, and especially the sport shoes. And so it was really irrelevant when I took off the headscarf and first spoke, "For sure you will not find lice on this head. Have you checked the other children already? Are they all free of lice? If one child was found with lice, you are, as a teacher, obliged to examine the other children also, and if necessary, to remove them from the class. Does the director actually know about this incident? I think the health department should be informed, right?" Mrs. Wetzel knew she had made a mistake, and now stood with her back to the wall. "Check the children now," I demanded in a low, dangerous tone. It was clear to her I would stick to my threat to inform the health department. In fact, she found 2 other children with head lice, a girl and a boy named Sven. His blonde haircut and parted exemplary, as it was proper for a boy from a good German family. Now, these 2 students were unfortunately the laughingstock of the class. 3 weeks later, the head lice alert broke out again, and again it was Sven who had lice. Nevertheless, Michael was becoming very quiet and reserved. I spoke with Roland about my worries. He himself, a father of 2 half-breed children, advised me, "Your son has no identity, Rita. He grows up without his father, and this makes him lacking something. You mustn't forget, our children are special, but they are having it very hard in this society. Without his African father, he simply lacks the necessary support, and you fight alone against windmills. Fly with him to Ghana, show him the land where his father comes from, introduce him to his African grandparents. Thus, he learns to be proud of his background." What Roland said made sense to me, so I suggested to Michael, "Let's fly in the summer to Ghana." However, quite contrary to my expectation, Michael was almost horrified. "You can fly alone there. I'm not flying to Africa. I want nothing to do with the Africans." It was already too late. I should have done this sooner. Michael was planning something else instead. He wanted to join Kevin in a youth group to a camp, spending his holidays there. Amir, whom I would have needed badly at those times, had flown some months before with his great love to Iran, his homeland. Both of them had still shown me proudly the photos of their vacation in Iran and told me about the difficulties they experienced as a couple. Not one single moment they had been allowed to be alone. Shortly after their return, everything was suddenly finished between them. Amir brought this so much out of his emotional equilibrium that he didn't only withdrew himself from me and his other friends. No, he refused all contact categorically. During our last phone conversation, I reminded him we were always there for each other, and I would not let him down now. I will leave Germany and don't want contact with anyone anymore. This goes for you too, and don't get the idea to come up to see me. I don't want to see neither you nor anyone else. There was nothing to be done. Ralph also had a similar conversation with Amir, and we both let him know he could always count on us. I saw Amir never again, and this tore a huge gap for me, which no one else could fill. How often had he been there for me? Even with my complicated amalgam poisoning, he was always by my side, held my hand during a complicated periodontal treatment. We laughed and cried together, and now all over. Meanwhile, Sabine had Tom, who in his life had never flown before and also wanted to keep it that way, convinced to finally change his mind, but on the condition he determined the destination. In contrast with Sabine's former destinations in the Caribbean, they now planned to fly to Gambia. Gambia? Well, I don't know, I said skeptically, but Sabine was old enough to know what she was doing. Gelly would fly with Chrissy, another group member of the Black Music Mad Women, to Turkey, where my neighbors were going also. Although Renate had no plans for the holidays, she simply lived too far outside Hamburg, in Buchholz. So I thought with horror of the holiday season and my loneliness. Recently, I had bought myself a PC and was internet connected. More out of curiosity, I looked at websites for last-minute travel and found a highly competitive offer: flight and hotel for 1 week in Torremolinos, Spain, for only 450 marks. My overdraft on the account was already strained, but so far I had always managed to balance the account again. So I booked this trip, at least getting away for 1 week. Also, I possessed not the slightest glimmer whereabouts was Torremolinos. Most Germans fly to Mallorca or Alicante. The fact that the second largest Balearic island, namely Ibiza, firmly was in British hands I already knew by then. From internet I got hold of the knowledge Torremolinos was a place in the province of Malaga, in southern Spain. What I could see from the pictures on the internet I liked very much. For Michael, it was not a problem if I would fly to Spain alone. It seemed rather as if he was quite happy about it, that we took separate vacations. My son was cutting the cord, and this made me very sad to see, as he was more distant to me. Quite some time now, the joint excursions during the weekends we didn't do anymore. Michael preferred to spend his free time with his friends, to play football or play with his PlayStation. At dinner he was not as talkative as he used to be, except when the subject came to football. Then he still had a lot to tell me. The coach of his football team had put Michael as a goalkeeper, of which he was naturally very proud. But when the first important match was taking place, Michael was not participating. The night before he had a severe asthma attack, weakened and desperately unhappy in my arms, and I cried with him about the unfortunates of my beloved son.